the regular School Board of Rutland City Commissioners to order. If we could please all stand and say the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So roll call. Everybody's here with the exception of Brittany and Allison. And Hurley. Sorry. Approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion, Charlene? Second. And then the regular and consent agenda. We do have an addendum to the personnel report that should have been at your place. And there are 6 meeting minutes in this and a bid for the pellets. Any talk? I have a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, passes. So the next is protocol review and communications. So we do have board operating protocols. It's in your packet. Please keep them at top of mind for everybody in the room. Public input. Is there anybody who would like to address the board at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Student representative report.
All right, so Northeast students will be celebrating the Year of the Book this month with trips to the local library and continued book giveaways. Students and staff at Northeast celebrated Halloween with classroom celebrations, including parades, pumpkin decorating contests, and harvest arts and crafts. Pause skill building and celebrations for last month focused on respect and kindness. This month, Northeast is focusing on relaxation, using strategies to help our bodies and minds feel calm and content. Looking for and talking about things we appreciate is a great way to build feelings of being secure and content, so we at Northeast School are modeling and practicing this as much as possible. Northwest's Red Ribbon Week focused upon healthy choices children can make for themselves. Students and staff dressed in various healthy choice themes all week that culminated with a glorious outdoor Halloween parade featuring Draculas, ninjas, and princesses. Northwest enjoyed an exciting Cliff Year of the Book presentation by author and illustrator Marty Kelly, who engaged children with his stories and shared with the process of writing and illustrating books, to include the need to make mistakes and make revisions through the writing process. This inspired our children to write and illustrate their own stories as we, quote, open books, open minds, and open doors with the incredible Cliff opportunity that came to Northeast and Northwest as a part of our grant. At RIS, we had a very successful fall festival as our first school-wide PBIS celebration. In recognition of all the tokens earned for displaying expected behaviors, our PBIS team, with the help of Miss Adams and Miss LaBelle, planned a fun event for all. Students rotated through stations with their grade level peers and enjoyed hot chocolate and apples. We were happy to welcome parent volunteers to this outside event. We also showed our school spirit during Red Ribbon Week and ended the week with a costume parade on the playground. Due to shipping delays experienced everywhere, we were recently notified our picture retake day needs to be postponed. The new date is set for December 1st. Lastly, we are excited to be hosting a COVID-19 vaccination clinic at RIS on November 17th. Parents choosing to have their students vaccinated are encouraged to register through the Department of Health website by tomorrow, Wednesday, November 10th. And for Stafford, applications for the 2022-2023 school year are now open for the Stafford on our website. Both Melissa Connor and our outreach coordinator, Cindy Dunnigan, visited several partner schools over the last week to share the opportunities available to the students of Stafford as part of their high school education. Already, we have had well over 100 applications submitted, and students have not even visited yet. Beginning the week of November 22nd, all sophomores will be invited to learn more about the programs to see how Stafford may fit into their career path. On December 9th, we have we have also a host career night for students and families to check out the programs together. On Friday, November 12th, we will hold our first Student of the Marking Period Assembly. Students that are selected to be student of the marking period for their program or academic area will be treated to a luncheon at the Dollhouse, and the Dollhouse will be open for reservations to the community coming very soon. Finally, the salon at Stafford is officially open for business. Anyone interested in being pampered by our cosmetology students may call for an appointment at 770-1055. Thank you.
At RMS, we began our Caught in the Acts of Kindness awards this week. Numerous students submitted kind acts they have witnessed their peers doing. We are looking forward to continuing this award throughout the year. Our counselors will be hosting a coffee with the counselors on November 16th. Parents and guardians can come and learn about child development, TikTok, Snapchat, and general internet safety. We hope families find this useful as they support their middle school students through early adolescence. Birch House recently participated in a Rutland County field experience. They visited Menden Brook, the water filtration plant, the wastewater treatment facility, and Pine Hill Park to learn about where our water comes from, where it goes, and why it's worth saving. This science-based lesson supported their self and PACE lesson. Rutland High School is recognizing Veterans Day with 3 days of visits from the Rutland City Police and Fire Departments, the Vermont Army National Guard, and members of the American Legion. These groups have been present this week on the back circle during lunch blocks, which has allowed students to interact with and ask questions of the members. Thank you to all those who serve. Congratulations to Brady Geisler, who has been selected as this year's recipient of the Daughters of the American Revolution Good Citizenship Award. As the award recipient, he will receive a DAR Good Citizen pin and certificate. In the spring, there is usually a lunch hosted by the organization to recognize local schools' award winners. As the RHS winner, you are now eligible to participate in the Scholarship Essay Contest, where you could potentially win a scholarship ranging from $250 to $5,000. The Allen Street campus is completing our final preparation for the winter season. Today we have completed our soil preparation by layering compost, manure, cardboard, and newspaper, creating soft, fertile beds that will meld together, forming perfect soil for gardening this spring. Unfortunately, we had to remove 3 of our apple trees due to disease this year. We will be replacing them with 7 new apple trees consisting of 3 species to provide an edible landscape that lasts months. It will take a few years of training and care before we can feed our community and wildlife. Be on the lookout for organic Allen Street offerings this spring. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Lots of exciting things. I was telling Suzanne earlier that, Northeast is so long ago for me, but it's still so amazing, and the Halloween parade was so fun. So thank you. Rutland High School Program of Studies, I believe Bianca McKean.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm Bianca McKean. I am an associate principal at Rutland High School, and my main focus is teaching and learning. So tonight I'll be talking about the noteworthy changes to our program of studies. So every year we publish a program of studies for students and families in order for them to review our current course offerings. As a part of that preparation, faculty review the courses and they propose changes. This year we asked our teaching staff to consider new courses that might spark new interests for students, reinvigorate material, and allow for flexibility. As a result of that process, we had more new course proposals than we do in a typical year. Those courses are listed on the enclosure that you have this evening. But before I go through the list, I'd like to explain very quickly what the process is like from here. So every year, courses go into our program of studies, and when students register for courses for next year, with their school counselors, they select a variety of both required and elective courses. And if there is a new elective course that gets proposed, oftentimes teachers will promote that course with students. Ultimately, which courses run and those that we decide are not going to run is really based on both student interest as well as the capacity within our master schedule. So some of the courses that were previously listed in our program of studies have been removed because they have not had student interest for several years. And when we propose several new courses like we are tonight, we want to ensure that we do so in a way that makes it possible to run those courses with our current resources that we have available to us. So therefore, the new courses being proposed, we anticipate absorbing into existing structures without adding additional staffing or substantial resources. And we believe that many of these classes will spark interest for our current students. So I'll briefly talk about the courses that we are proposing. Next year, our English department will be trying something a little bit differently. Traditionally, senior students take English 4, which is a British literature course. Next year, we are hoping to switch it up and offer a senior seminar, which will allow for student choice. So students will have the option of English 4, British literature, AP English, which is also currently offered, and then we have a few electives that we already offer to students, as well as the new one proposed, which is Literature of Landscapes. All of the courses will meet the same expectations of students and would fulfill that English 4 requirement, but it would allow for greater student choice. In fine arts, we have 2 fairly new art teachers to Rutland High School, although both are very experienced professionals. And so that group worked together to revamp the offerings that we currently have to ensure that we are competitive with postgraduate needs for our students and varied exposure. So you'll see that there are advanced courses in both 2D and 3D art. For music, this year we actually piloted the course Applied Music, which is listed for you. And we piloted it as a term class, and it's been incredibly successful. And so we've decided to move it to a semester-long class for students. For mathematics, we have a new course we're proposing called Medical Math. Again, we have a new teacher that came to Rutland High School, very experienced, who has taught this course in her previous school in the Boston area. Students really enjoyed the course, and it helps prepare students for a variety of postgraduate experiences. It's been a few years since Social Studies has put forward a new course, and they have a new course that they're hoping to offer, which they hope will allow students more flexibility to take courses beyond those that are currently required. And then in science, we have 2 new course proposals. The first one is a new form of earth science that would be an earth science English combined course, co-taught. Part of the reason we are proposing that is because our 9th graders currently, some of them have different needs than we've seen previously, and we're realizing that they're really benefiting from hands-on learning, team teaching. So students enrolled in that course would receive both an English and an earth science credit. And finally, Physics Big Questions aims to make physics available and accessible to all students. This particular class is more conceptual and less math focused. So sometimes students will move away from taking a physics class because they're a little intimidated by the math, but this would make it accessible to all students. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm just curious more about the whole health care in the mathematics. What sets that apart from, I'm just curious about that.
The medical math course. So I think that this specific course would be looking at, so it would be open to any student who has completed through Math 2. So it could be open essentially sophomores and up for most of our students. And the description speaks a little more in detail to what they would be covering, but it would really be looking at making those connections within science and within the medical field for students, more of an applications field to the math curriculum, so they're applying that learning to a real-world example. And it would be an elective course that students could take if they chose to.
Have the teachers been selected yet for these classes?
So what normally happens is we put this out to departments, and departments oftentimes work with the teachers within the departments to propose courses. Oftentimes, there might be one teacher who's really interested in the course who would put forward the proposal and work on the curriculum for the course. Usually, if possible, we try to have that teacher run the course the first year, especially since they have that passion. But ultimately, it depends on how many sections students are interested in and where we have the flexibility to have teachers offer those electives. So no, that happens way later in the process.
And I have a second question. Are the curriculum set for these yet?
So in some cases, there are courses that maybe teachers have worked on previously, particularly the arts classes, for example. But the other courses, they would start that process after they know if the course is going to run or not. So they've started some of the initial work, but in terms of putting together all of the syllabus, scope and sequence, that would happen a little bit later in the year when we know what the student interest is.
Thank you.
I just have a question about, so these look like prep and honors additions or potential, these are potential additions or they are additions?
So these would be, this is what we're proposing as additions for next year. And so the ones where you see prep and honors, that's a situation where the teacher would be offering both levels, in most cases, sometimes within the same classroom, and would differentiate for students wanting to take it for the honors credit, but it would be accessible to students in both, seeking both potential levels.
So, so it's AP, do you generally have any AP type of thing, classes that would you propose as well? Or is it just not in this go round?
Yeah, so this is this year's program of studies. And so we have many AP courses that we are currently offering, and those are still included in here. These are just the new courses. And so we don't have any new AP courses that were proposed for this year's offerings, but we would keep the existing ones. Yes. And absolutely, we would still put those forward. This is about 60 pages, so there's lots of courses that are outlined in here.
Other questions? Okay, I just have one comment, because I love how schools connect. So maybe the nursing program and the medical math can somehow collaborate. I feel like that conversation might have been done, but it sounds positive. And maybe research-based is how that is a little bit too, right?
Yeah.
So, no other questions on that? Thank you guys so much. They sound exciting. Next up is Mr. Olson.
Thanks, Erin. I would like to remind parents, or I'll start off by reminding parents that Thursday is Veterans Day and our schools are off in recognition of the holiday, and we thank our veterans. So that's Thursday, November 11th. November 12th, we have school. Don't forget. We do have school Friday. Next, we have a vaccination opportunity, a clinic that's been offered to us by the Department of Health. We actually have 2 clinics that are happening next week for students that are ages 5 to 11. The Department of Health assigns these clinics to us, so they've assigned one location being Northeast School, and the other location is RIS, Rutland Intermediate. They're offering the 2-dose Pfizer vaccine for children that age. And so just a few details. This information has already gone out to parents, but I'm just trying to remind folks. The Northeast Clinic is Tuesday, November 16th. It's in the RIS clinic is on Wednesday, November 17th. So it's Northeast first, then RIS. And then the second doses you'd be going to the same place, and the second doses will happen on December 7th and December 8th in the same order, Northeast and then RIS. To be absolutely clear, we're trying to get Northeast students to sign up for the Northeast Clinic and Northwest students to sign up to the Northeast Clinic. We can only have it in one of those places, so we're going to have it at Northeast, and we're going to bus students from Northwest over to Northeast to get vaccinated. And we're also going to try to change the schedules so that we can make sure that it's logical that we can get kids to a clinic and still be able to attend school and not have their schedule disrupted too much. So Northeast and Northwest students would be going to the Northeast Clinic on Tuesday. RIS students, they'd be signing up for the RIS Clinic on Wednesday. Okay, so I hope I'm clear on that. To sign up for the clinic, if you're interested as a parent,
you have to go to the Department of Health website. There's a vaccination page, and it's a fairly easy process to sign up. If you don't have access to a computer, you can sign up via telephone as well. And all that information is on the letters that went out to parents just last week, actually. So we're encouraging vaccinations, and we hope that we would get people signed up by this Thursday, because on Friday we're going to try to take our rosters and sort through the scheduling and set up some bus trips for Northeast or Northwest students. Okay. Last month I had talked about the testing process that we're developing. Most of those steps have been taken to set that up. We're kind of at the final stages of planning, so that should be running soon, and we'll have information coming to parents very soon. Next, I wanted to thank everyone and compliment everyone, the staff, the nurses, and the administrators for over the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we've had a very challenging time in the state with the pandemic. Cases have been rising across the state, and we appreciate the work that the staff has done to try to make sure kids are in school, and we've worked through this process. We also understand that there's a lot of stress on families, and the pandemic has affected people in a lot of different ways. So I just wanted to say we appreciate the patience that people have had and the cooperation that people have shown to try to help the schools work through the challenge of the last 2 months. We have the vaccination on the horizon, as I just mentioned, and we hope that this will soon ease off. We're close to the end, but we thank everyone for sticking with us as we work through the challenge of the last 2 months. I wanted to do a little preliminary intro to, Ted's going to be talking about the budget in a few minutes, and I just wanted to say a couple things about the budget. We are, of course, aiming to be fiscally responsible while meeting the needs of the students. That's always our goal. At the same time, we've had grants that are coming from the federal government to address the effects of the pandemic. So you've heard Rob and Ted and Abby speak about the ESSER funds and how they work, and they've noted that those funds are highly regulated. So we really have to be able to use this money just to address the needs of the pandemic and how it's affected students. The important thing to remember is ESSER funds can't be used to supplant our local budget. So that kind of sounds like a confusing contradiction. The way to think of it is we have our local funds to do what we would be doing normally. We have ESSER funds to address the disruption that was caused by the pandemic and to try to think ahead in the future about how do we avoid some of these, a similar issue again. If we're focusing on some of the air quality standards and trying to make sure that the schools are as healthy and clean as they can be. So just a preview to some of the budget talk. I also wanted to thank the board for the 2 trainings that you attended with Susan Holson in the Vermont School Boards Association. I appreciate your time and your effort and your collaboration. The discussions were really good. I wanted to update the board on Hurley's behalf. Hurley couldn't be here tonight, but our next step, Susan has advised us, is we should be reviewing those goals and approving them. She suggested that the board and the administration work together to determine what kind of indicators we could develop for those goals, what kind of evidence that we show that we've met those goals, and what kind of outcomes we want to reach. So I asked Susan if she would be available to do that with us again, and she said she would. She's willing to do so. So with your permission, we would be trying to set that up. We'd try to set up one more meeting that would try to work through the last piece of what she was working with us on, and then we can go from there. So that's all I got.
Okay, sounds good. And
I have a question, please. Is it true that adult family members or even employees could sign up for vaccinations at the clinics here, or can you walk into boosters?
That's very true. So what we've tried to hold off saying that because we'd like to get the younger students. That's okay. It's going to come out sometime. That's yeah. We want to get the students age 5 through 11 vaccinated, but it looks like we're going to have some space. And as we understand from the Department of Health, they will take walk-ins, and they will take walk-ins for boosters. So, and I think we can even get some of our middle school students in there if they're interested. So, we're going to look at our rosters on Friday and see what kind of numbers we have, and then we'll try to do another communication out to get as many people in there as we can. thanks for bringing that up.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Olson? Okay. Moving on, Stafford Tech budget, Melissa Connor and Ted.
That's going to be Kate.
Bring another chair. Bring Kate, yes. Or Ted.
Here you go, sir. Thank you, sir.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you about our budget. Because there are so many new board members, we did want to give a little bit of background about how our budget is processed, because it is a little bit different than the regular city school budget. So we have a regional advisory board, which is a board that oversees the career and tech ed centers in the state of Vermont. And we have a subcommittee of that is a finance committee that is made up of all of the superintendents for all of the regional schools that we serve, school board members from some of the districts, as well as business and community members. So it is a really well-rounded board. And so what we have each year is they come up with a charge for us when we begin the budget development. And this year we were charged with having no more of an increase over our tuition of 5%. You may recall that last year we held at 0%. And we were able to really do that by accessing a lot of grants so that the programming did not change. So we started the process. It's usually the very first faculty meeting of the school year when they're thinking about like the next week. We're asking them to start thinking and predicting budgets for the following school year. So we start much earlier so that we can put together our budget and have an announced tuition rate for all of our partner schools to use in their budget development. So as we go through the process, our RAB Finance Committee met a total of 3 times before we landed on a budget which we will present to you tonight. So in the packet that we shared with you, I just want to go over a few key parts of that. On pages 6 and 8, this is something that's called the 6-semester average, which is really critical to the funding formula for career and technical education. So each semester in October and March, we have to take enrollment counts. And what happens with those enrollment counts is that they are broken down by the towns in which the students that we serve reside. So it's not based on the school that they attend, but it's actually where they reside. And what happens is that the state puts that together into a rolling 6-semester average. So they take the enrollments for each town, and then they bill those towns based on that 6-semester average. And what this does is it protects towns from having a sudden spike. If there's a sudden spike in enrollment, it protects them from having a huge increase in a tuition bill. So for instance, I'll just talk about Rutland City. So for this year, we currently, in our October enrollments, we have 70 Rutland City students. Keeping in mind that's not Rutland High School, it's Rutland City. And at this point, the 6-semester average for Rutland City is 73.319. So we're billing for 73, but we have 70 students. And that is, if you think back last year, we had 79 Rutland City students. So again, it kind of helps the fluctuation so that you have a more stabilized tuition rate and for billing purposes. In thinking about our budget, some new things that Kate's going to walk through the specifics. We are still committed to expanding the electrical and plumbing program. As you may recall, we had advertised for an electrical instructor this year and we were unsuccessful in filling that position. And so we are going to try again for next year. There's a huge demand. We're also, last year, we had intended to expand the health careers program, but we put a pause on that because we were trying to stay within that 0% budget constraint. And so we are hoping to expand the health careers program, which will be a nice connection because Vermont Technical College is now housed at Stafford with an RN program. So we're really hoping it will be a nice pathway to that program. So the majority of those positions will be funded through a grant. There will be a little bit in the local budget. We're only allowed to put in a certain percentage of benefits into the grant. So there'll be a percentage of benefits in the local budget this year. And each year, the grant, we're required to decrease the grant and then increase the local budget. But the goal is that through the enrollments, through that 6-semester average that I explained, as we are getting it 100% into the local budget, it will be covered by the revenues that we were receiving through tuition. So it'll net out. So that is the goal.
The other thing that we're starting to look at when we add programs, just to give you a little sense from the Agency of Education, we are now having to only add or have programming that results in high demand, high skill, and high wage jobs. So a lot of programming will see some changes over the coming years. These two, we feel confident, as the RAB feels confident that they will meet that need by the high demand, high skill, and high wage. So that's just a different lens that we're going to be looking through. So a couple of things, as Kate goes through a lot of the budget, there are a lot of estimates in our budget because we do things so early. And so just to give you a little sense, with the state regulations for career and tech ed, we have what's called a 3% window. So if we were to go over expenses and we needed additional funds, it's capped at 3%. So if we spent 10% over our budget and we needed to increase tuition because of that, we can only bill an additional 3%. The opposite of that is if we underspend, if we had overestimated what we thought we needed and we don't spend that, again, we can keep 3%, but anything beyond that 3%, we would have to return to the towns. So there really is some stabilization for our budget, so that, you know, if we over or underestimate based on these estimates that we're using, it does protect the towns and the taxpayer as well. One thing that's a little bit different, typically we're giving you a detailed outline of our Perkins grant. With Perkins 5, which started a couple of years ago, all of the landscape of that grant has changed. I described it to Superintendent Olson. I feel like every 2 years we're going to be doing a NEASC decennial visit, because that's what it feels like, the detail that they're looking at our school. And so with that, every 2 years we have to conduct what's called a comprehensive local needs assessment, which is a multi-part process where we are examining every program in detail. And so with that, we have written a 5-year plan for our grant, which is detailed in your packet, but we cannot actually put together a budget for what it's going to look like for the next fiscal year until we complete this comprehensive local needs assessment. Because if the business community and if the details of this report don't show a need, we cannot spend money on it. So that is something that is a little bit different, and we are still learning the process as well. So in the packet, typically last year we received about $387,000, and as you know with grants, it's money in, money out, it's break even. So we use that as the benchmark for our grant. And so if you want details on the information about the overarching goals, that was in page 3 and 4 of your packet. And then finally, you may recall last year we received a significant amount of money through the COVID relief through the GEAR grant in order to put career and tech ed into a situation where we could operate virtually and we could provide students with a one-to-one capacity, whether it be tools, computers, and things like that. They extended the the time frame that we have to spend the money, so we still have about $91,000 of, it was just under $400,000 that we received. And so what we are doing right now is doing an assessment of where our needs still are. Because what we don't want to do is, well, as Mr. Olson mentioned, we cannot supplant our local. It has to be specifically for situations that were developed by COVID. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that all of our programs, should we ever have to resort to going back to remote going forward, that we have the capacity to do that. So we're going to be doing a reassessment center-wide and figuring out where our needs still are, and then we will let you know where that's going to be spent. But originally it was Chromebooks, but we're not sure if that's, we were lucky to get a lot of Chromebooks, and so we'll be working with IT to figure out where should we be leveraging those funds. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who's going to walk you through the specifics of this year's budget, and then I'll wrap it up with the next steps.
Thank you all. So as Melissa mentioned, this year we were tasked with developing a budget that came in under 5% for our tuition rate increase. And last year we presented a budget based on the recommendations from our finance committee of 0%. So this year we were, as we are each year, thoughtful in how we were building our budget to best support our students and provide the best education for them without cutting costs that would impact their education with us. So I will begin on page 5 of your packet. And as Melissa mentioned, part of this budget is built through local funds and grant funds. So the Perkins allocation, again, for FY23 is an estimate based on what we've received this year. So that's approximately $387,000. As we move into the budget, there are a couple of different pieces here that are important. We use the FY22 base education rate as part of our calculation for tuition, and that increases about 2% each year with inflation. And this rate is needed to estimate the overhead assistance cost that is provided to us by the state. For FY23, we have the direct total expenditures of an increase between both fiscal years 22 and 23 of 8.9%. And then, as Melissa mentioned, this was, again, a challenging budget year with an expected increase of healthcare costs about 5.2% and 3% increase in salary costs. So that was built into the expenditure portion. And then we worked with our staff at the start of the school year when they presented our budgets to us. And again, we want to deliver high quality education and experiences, and some of those experiences and educational needs required big equipment purchases. But those equipment purchases really put us over the 5%. So we had to think about what other funding sources do we have available to us. So through other federal grants and grants through the AOE, we removed new equipment purchases. These were also recommendations through our NEASC review and our Perkins plan and our strategic plan process. So with that helped us come in under that 5% cost. So due to the cuts that we made, the total expenditures are increasing by 9.3% for FY23. And with that, our total revenues for FY23 are up comparatively to the previous year of 9.6%. So that's great. And that's partly due to the increase in our 6th semester average and also that small increase in our Perkins funding that will be available to us. So it's a lot of different moving pieces. It's a lot of pots of money. There's a lot of rules with federal money, but we're confident in what we've created, and we look forward to the next year and the next round of great Stafford stuff. So I will give that over to Melissa.
Perfect. And so as Kate mentioned, we do have several grants that we're still working on. One is called a TIME grant, and that's an agency of education that is solely, the portion that we're applying for is solely equipment-based. It is a competitive grant. So a lot of the items that have never been purchased before, so different machines, we're hoping to get through that grant, and we would, not supplant because we've never purchased those before. So as you can see, we do have a tuition increase of 4.8% is what the RAB Finance Committee has put forth. So the next steps that we have for this process is that on December 8th, we will go before our full Regional Advisory Board, and then they will seek to approve the budget to move it forward for ratification by this board on December 14th. And then also on December 14th, we would be asking you to approve the acceptance of Perkins funds, not necessarily knowing the exact amount, but giving us the permission to accept those funds. So with that, if there are any questions, I don't know if Ted, if you wanted to add.
I think you've said it all. An excellent review. Thank you so much, both of you.
Yes. So.
I'm not sure, but how do you feel, or what is your comfort level as far as the maybe opportunity, not maybe an opportunity, but maybe a weakness as far as where the economy is going and the job market, and you have so many people that rely on, like, for example, the electrician that you can't seem to grab. Are there places where a class could collapse because of losing vendors, or I'm not sure what I'm trying to ask, but maybe people that specialize in that particular type of class that you're trying to do. Is there a concern there of where things are going because of COVID?
I think, we have so many careers that are in high demand, and in the private sector, they can make so much more money. For instance, we had a phenomenal candidate last year for the electrical position, but he was going to take almost a $30,000 a year pay cut in order to come and work in the school system. So that's always a challenge. I was saying to Superintendent Olson, I have the same worries about the second health careers instructor. And so, a lot of, when we have engineers, we were very lucky this year with the engineering instructor that we hired. He's retired military, so he has that pension, and so the pay wasn't as big of a deal. It takes that special person who has worked in industry for a really long time, and they want to give back, and they want to ensure that their career field really is continuing, and by inspiring the next generation. So it really takes that special person, and I can say we've been fortunate at Stafford that this is the first time in my 7 years that we haven't been able to fill a position. So I think Stafford is a special place, and people, know our reputation, and they know, as being part of Rutland City Public Schools, that it's a good place to come and work. So I think that helps us.
Good.
So.
Other questions, Stephanie?
So you mentioned about getting grants for like the bigger equipment. Is that what you're going to propose, like using those funds for, is what you cut out of the budget?
Yes. Yeah. So, and when we cut it out of the budget, the things that we're using the grants for, it's things that we haven't purchased before, so it was new because we have to avoid that whole supplanting.
Okay,
so absolutely. You're welcome.
Other questions? All right, thanks.
All right, thank you.
The maintenance and capital plan budget, Ted's gonna speak on behalf of Glenn and financials.
Yeah, thank you very much, and apologize that we didn't have material in your board package, but it's coming around for you to take a look at. My colleague and friend Glenn Scott is traveling, so he wasn't able to be with us tonight, but I've worked closely with Glenn in pulling this material together. The idea is to give you a snapshot, a brief update of where the outlook is for the fiscal 2023 Buildings, Grounds, and Transportation budget. There's still a lot of work to be done, but we thought that by providing a brief overview to you tonight, give you an opportunity to provide any guidance, ask any questions, make suggestions as you might either tonight or in the coming week. So thank you for that opportunity. So if you'll turn to page 2, please, just by way of overview, I just wanted to summarize briefly a couple of the basic steps that we're using to develop the Buildings, Grounds, and Transportation budget this year. The first step is almost like a zero-based budgeting approach, where we start by thinking about, what are the costs going to be for our ongoing base operations with a just keep the lights on approach, keep things running consistently. Then we're also layering on to that, we're incorporating some selected repairs and upgrades that were identified as part of the consultant study done last year. There's quite a large array of possibilities that the consultant recommended, so Michael Deravianic, before he left, and Glenn Scott since, have been going through to try and work up a priority and time schedule for when to do some of those repairs, particularly if we're able to utilize now some of the grant funding that's become available. Then the next step is to prioritize those opportunities and upgrades based not only upon their criticality to the district and safe operations, but also in terms of their eligibility for these grants, and finally in terms of can we get them done during the time frames required for the grants. So layering on an additional layer of consideration there. The next step is going to be as we develop a final budget recap, we are going to distinguish between the part of the budget that will need to be funded out of the general education fund, which means the taxpayer, versus grants from the federal government. That'll be important. You might recall from some of our earlier discussions that the budget framework, if you will, starts with top-line expenses, total expenditures by the district. From that, we subtract the revenues that we're able to procure from federal sources and local sources, which leaves us a net to be funded by the state of Vermont. And the important point there is you can add $100 of expenses for a project as long as you also then add $100 in federal grant revenue without having any impact on the cost of the local taxpayer. So not all expenses are created equal. There are some that, if you cut them, you'll lose the grant funding, and so so there's no impact on the bottom line. So we're going to be sorting that out and giving an overview for you in our subsequent review so you can understand the thinking. And then, of course, a part of every process is just to revisit and make sure that we have our staffing at the right levels relative to the work that's anticipated in the coming year. So I've shown you at the bottom of the page just 3 examples of ESSER-funded projects that are underway. Abby and Rob, of course, have spoken about these, briefly at least, and these are projects that meet some of the criteria that we've outlined above, and there are more to come, of course. Do you have any questions about the overview or the process that I've shared with you so far? Okay, please feel free to stop me at any point. Let's go on to page 3. So in addition to the 3 projects we talked about, there are a number of other projects under consideration. As you've heard Abby and Rob report to you earlier, we have a very systematic process underway for gathering and inventorying possibilities and then evaluating those. So I have listed just 4 of those that are under consideration. It shows you the range, I think, of creativity that we're approaching this with, such as potentially an outdoor classroom for each school, which would have obvious benefits in terms of many aspects of instruction. Then, just for perspective, I wanted to show you what some of the recent annual budgets have been. And as you can see over the last 3 years, basically, they've been in the $1.5 million to $1.8 to $1.7 million range. And I will remind you briefly that each budget consists of both a maintenance piece, which is the largest expense piece, and typically some amount of capital in the range of $200,000 to $300,000 in recent years. You might recall that in total, we reduced our budget $68,000 from 21 to 22. That was about 4%, and our goal going forward, as I'm going to describe to you in a moment, is for 23 to be flat to down in total. Any questions about that overview? Okay, so now we get to look at a picture or two, because I love graphs, and I hope these will help illustrate. Yes, sorry.
Okay, ladies have questions. Dina?
Yes, Dina.
So I don't forget, because...
Sure, of course.
Do you have an estimation or a sense of how much of the deferred maintenance part is going to be potentially scheduled to actually happen in the next budget year?
Okay, so let me break that down for you. The answer to your question is yes, we do. Every year as part of this budget process, in addition to looking at maintenance and capital components, we also estimate what is deferred. And the typical amounts, if we were to go back and look at, say, the last 3 years, even before we had the benefit of this consultant study, we typically have millions of dollars in potential deferred maintenance. I want to be careful because sometimes the term deferred maintenance has a pejorative connotation. It can sound very bad. Oh, gee, you haven't done this and you should. It's maintenance that, in the judgment of the director and the senior administration, is something that we need to keep on our radar and something that could come up sooner or later, but something that doesn't have an immediate urgency that would potentially jeopardize safe and continuous operations. But there's a lot of dollars out there. And in addition to that, when the consultant did the facilities condition assessment recently, we started taking a look at all of their recommendations and what that would look like on a time-by-time basis. And they gave us ranges. This is what we recommend you do right now, and that was several $100,000. This is what we recommend you do over the next 3 to 5 years, the next 3 years, the next 4 to 5, the 5 to 10. We've broken down all of that. It goes further than that, but the one number that I do recall, even though it was a year ago when I looked at it, Dina, was the total over 10 years was a potential of $8 million. Now, that's just what a consultant is saying, coming in for a couple of days, looking quickly at this, and as we said to Michael and to Glenn, you actually have the hands-on. You really know whether something is in dire need or not. And then we have to work with everybody in terms of prioritizing. So the answer to your question is, it is millions of dollars, but I give you the extra background because I don't want anybody to jump to a conclusion that, oh my goodness, we're in serious trouble, because that's not necessarily the case. But we're trying to be smart about looking at what should be done first. If you're looking at a roof over the cafeteria of the middle school that could benefit from refurbishment. Otherwise, you risk leaking into the cafeteria. Well, that's something that we're going to put on the list to review with the Finance Committee, the Building Committee, and then ultimately the full board sooner rather than later. But that's the process that we're going through. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions about that? Yes, Allison.
Just to be clear, so I think we've used up, we had a deferred maintenance bond that we had to go to the voters for several years ago.
Ah, okay.
It's $5 million. And I think we finished that up a couple years ago, so I don't know if that's what you're getting at possibly, or just deferring going forward. But we did have a sideline for several years that was what was being worked down out of that.
And that's a very important point, because as some of you might recall, and I hope everybody on the Finance Committee, the district has not had to go out into the debt market and borrow money since 2015. That was the last time we borrowed any money, because fortunately, given the nature of the cash flows and the finances, there's been no need. However, as Allison points out, if you go back a few years, there are some multi-million-dollar bonds that were issued. I wasn't sure whether this one that you just mentioned was for deferred maintenance or some other project, but that makes sense, and I appreciate that.
I don't remember the year, but.
Yeah, it was
did the
14 or 15, right.
Yeah.
And the important point about that is, so when we talk about the millions of dollars that could potentially be out there, one of the things that Glenn and I and other members of the administration talk about is, do we get to a point where we say, hey, here's this package of things that we really do want to do, and rather than spreading them out, maybe we would consider bundling some things up and proposing a financing package once again as in the past. That's a complicated question and a lot to consider, but that's certainly an option that's been used in the past. So, and by the way, we are looking, that's the bond on which we have about, let's see, I can't remember the exact balance, but there are a couple of bonds out there that have interest rates of over 3%. There's one out there, 4 3/8, and that's the one that we're talking about refinancing in the coming year through the Vermont Bond Bank before rates go up too much. And I'm going to be working with the Finance Committee on that at our next meeting. Any other questions? Those are good. I really appreciate that. So to the pictures, a little bit more interesting, I hope. So what this shows you is, you know, I know in some of my reviews, I've never had an opportunity just to present kind of a typical profile, a summary profile of what a given year's budget might look like for buildings, ground, and transportation. So I thought I would just illustrate, I won't go through all the details, but I thought I'd just illustrate for you the composition of what a typical, you know, last year's budget was $1.7 million. And if you look over on the left side, you'll see several bars, and it shows you 6 categories that break down that $1.7 million. The largest, of course, being district-wide plant operations. And if you're wondering what that is, then look inside the little box that's right below, and it'll give you some examples of what that includes. The next largest, school-specific plant operations. And those are similar things, but school by school. And to break that down in terms of which schools involve where we spend the most in plant operations, you can take a look at the pie chart. No surprise, Rutland High School, the large light section, 37% or $193,000 for this particular year. RIS, in that particular snapshot, 16%, $83,000. RIMS, less than that, about 12%, and from there it's on below 10%. In the capital bar, by the way, you see that $315,000? Well, about 60% of that, $190,000, was budgeted for 2 school buses. The rest of the capital items are relatively small. And you might recall that Michael Deravianic in his tenure had set up a replacement schedule for the 20 or so vehicles and buses that we have to replace about 2 every year, considering that they have an average life of 10 years, so that you don't have massive spikes. Let's see, anything else? Well, vehicle maintenance and trucks. So that kind of shows you what we typically spend our money on out of buildings, grounds, and transportation. And we're anticipating the profile to look very similar, albeit with some pluses and minuses in the coming year. Any questions about that? Okay, then let's look at anticipated changes. So if you look at the box over at the left, there are two main messages, and we've really touched upon them already, but just to reiterate, so we're targeting for '23 for the buildings, grounds, and transportation budget to be flat to down from the current 1.7 million. I believe it's going to be a challenge to get it down. We're looking at some ideas and doing the best I can, and if any members of the board or the public have suggestions, you have my email and my phone, and I'll welcome all good ideas. But the first priority for capital spending, moving beyond the maintenance side, again, will be for projects that enhance safety. It's all about safety first, that maintain building integrity and preventing any damage, like the example of the roof I gave you, preferably that qualify for grant funding. And if it's a discretionary project that doesn't meet any of those criteria, then we evaluate it in terms of what's going to give us the highest rate of return, which typically will mean it's going to save me operating costs if I make this investment up front. So the areas in which we're anticipating higher costs are very easy to find, and there are many of them. I've listed a couple here for your interest, and those of us who don't drive an electric vehicle and go to the gas pump know that basically gasoline and diesel prices are about 50% year to year, and so that is going to impact our budget necessarily. Then there's a category, though, where we're going to have an absence of cost. So, for example, in '21 and '22, we did a significant amount of work cleaning out air ducts and painting classrooms. Hopefully, we won't need to spend as much money in the coming year on those things, but that's to be determined. But my point to you is costs could go down in '23 relative to '22 to the extent that there are some things we don't have to do again, which had been done to a greater extent before. And then, of course, anything that we can qualify as a project for grant funding, the $1 of expense offset by $1 of revenue will be important in avoiding costs. Lower costs, this is a lot harder to find. I mean, you can potentially use less of things. You can potentially use a different cleaning solution that might be a little less expensive. There are other aspects of that, though, that can cause concern. We're going to take a look at any agreements that we have expiring to look for bidding opportunities. We're going to see if we can manage staffing in such a way that we don't need to have as much overtime. We have spent, in some years, a significant amount on overtime. So we'll look at ways that we can balance out our activities and our workflows to see if we can get synergies. But in terms of finding anything that's on sale, it's hard to find anything on sale. Yes, Kevin.
You're talking about the bus replacement.
Yes.
I'm really not up to speed on there are getting to be some electric buses out there.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we might be able to?
Well, we've talked about it. And certainly if somebody were to tell me that through ESSER funding, we could buy an electric bus, I'd say let's buy 20 of them with one qualification. And even having worked in the energy industry, I don't know the answer to what I'm about to ask, which is, if I look at what the cost in terms of cents per mile is for an internal combustion engine gasoline versus the cents per mile for an electric vehicle, I don't know which one's cheaper, because I don't know how the gasoline price in terms of energy compares to the electrical cost in terms of BTU, kilowatt hours. Sure. And if somebody like yourself were to ask me, should we buy electric buses or electric vehicles, I would say, I don't know, but I'll find out for you, and I would do that kind of a calculation. Yeah. So that's something to consider. I suspect, however, that an easier prize, lower hanging fruit, if you want to go there for a moment on vehicles, would be to say we could spread the costs. What do I mean by that? Well, interest rates are still really low. So if we wanted to buy 2 new buses, we could think about leasing them at an extremely low interest rate and spreading those payments out. So we're talking cash flow management now, albeit at slightly higher expense because it's interest we wouldn't otherwise pay if we purchased, but it might help with the current year's budget for 1 or 2 years. Or Glenn might tell us, you know what, Michael had a great idea, but most of our buses can go another year, so we won't purchase 2 this year. And I'm going to be asking them that question. So we'll see. I think there's an easier way to go about it before we get to electric, and we will be exploring those alternatives. At the same time, Michael is also doing the thing that we all do with our vehicles, which is, if I'm going to have to put $2,000 of repairs into it this year, do I really want to do that, or is it getting too expensive to maintain? And some of our buses are older, and they are getting expensive to maintain.
Did we use less buses last year since kids weren't coming to school?
Well, I hope we did.
I mean, I know they were driving
I mean,
around,
theoretically, there
food
should
to
have been,
different places
right.
and-
Theoretically, there should have been less wear and tear. Now, the buses actually were active because they were delivering meals, because the students couldn't come to the schools to get the meals. But certainly, if we were to look at, and I've actually thought about, because I'm a numbers person and I plead guilty in all regards, but I'd like to find out at some point, like, at the beginning of a school year, let's take the odometer reading on every single bus. And then at the end of the school year, let's take the odometer readings again, and let's see how much mileage those vehicles drove. And I would bet that if we had done that covered the spring of 2020, you would have had far less mileage, hopefully. But, someday I want to do that so I can estimate gasoline consumption, which right now I'm just kind of ballparking.
Right.
Any other questions about that? So we have a great team here. We have a lot of creativity. I mean, Abby is bringing a tremendous amount to the team in terms of being able to explore, as Rob does, for grant funding. And we'll use those dollars as much as we can that we have already sent to Washington, and we'll try and get back as best we can. But it's going to be a challenge this year. Yeah, I can't sugarcoat that. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks to you. So if you would like, since I'm sitting here, I can just dive into the next topic, which is the budget update, at a higher level. So a lot of this is material that has already been reviewed by the Finance Committee earlier, because of course our approach is to speak with the Finance Committee, get their guidance and endorsement, and then come, and share the appropriate messages with you. And I've got 5 areas here that, we just want to highlight, some of which you're already aware. You heard from our friends from Stafford Technical this evening, and I'm just going to say, I know you've come to this conclusion, those are phenomenal results. I mean, phenomenal, because they are building the program, they're strengthening a great asset to the community, while keeping tuition flat last year and only going up 5% this year. I mean, it really, I'm so impressed, and I'm glad to be working with them. And, of course, they're benefiting from continued growth in enrollment, recognizing the 6-semester trailing average, but that does mean you may be dropping off a few previous semesters with lower enrollment, but it is going up, and that's always a great trend. And with the potential it has, hopefully that'll continue to be the case. Special education, every year in October, Pam Reed, our director, and members of her team prepare the district's special ed services plan that was submitted in October of this year, as usual. Pam is thinking at this point that, the individual education plans that we typically do in a given year is likely to remain in the general range of about 400 again this year, and that is just an indirect, approximate metric for activity and potentially related costs. We're in the process now that Pam and her colleagues have put together the operating plan, we're in the process of pricing that out so that we can come back to you soon and tell you what we think the impact is for our budget. You heard already the good news. It's interesting when 5% increase is good news, but VHI, the Vermont Educational Health Initiative, has proposed rate increases from 2.8 to 5.2%, just depending on the plan, and there are 4 different ones. Most of the employees of this district choose a plan that has a 5% increase attached to it, so that's what we're assuming in our budget. Continuing to prepare, and these words are chosen very carefully, for optimal use of ESSER grants. In other words, do the most good for the district and our projects that we know we can get done. And then in terms of staffing, we're still working with Bill, Rob, and other administrative leaders to evaluate what staffing is going to be needed for fiscal 2023. We are running below the budgeted positions right now. There are some positions that remain unfilled. And at this point in time, we are anticipating approximately a 2 to 3% attrition rate through retirements in this coming year, just based upon what people have informally advised us. So obviously, to the extent that people retire, that provides an opportunity for the district to think about, do we need to fill those positions? And if so, can we be a little selective about it? Because if we need to cut some staffing, that's an if, then this is a less painful way to go about doing it, obviously. So we're monitoring that. Any questions about these 5 areas? Yes, Allison.
Have we, Act 173, have we seen
the impact of that this year, or that's coming?
That's coming. So, that's.
Remember when it actually.
Oh, yeah, and part of the reason, and Pam may want to say more about this, but part of the reason is because it's been deferred for a few years, right? And so Pam, do you want to comment on that at all?
Correct, it's been deferred, and we do not know at this point what the impact is going to be from Act 173. They said that they're still working on formulas, and they'll let us know as soon as they have them ready.
Great for budget.
You bet.
Always fun.
Our point as well.
So you can always put together a budget. It's just a matter of how heroic the assumptions need to be. But the good news for us is everybody else is in that boat. So the AOE will be hearing from everybody if the delays. They're working as hard as they can. I mean, I don't envy the workload that they have for the resources. So, but yeah, that could be, and I emphasize could be, that could be a material impact. I don't know yet, and we're working very closely with Pam and her team to try and understand that. So, yeah, that's probably another item. Oh, I think I have it on another chart, but we'll see. There it is, at the bottom of page 3. So, why don't we turn to page 3? Uncertainties and headwinds. And most of these uncertainties are headwinds. So outcomes of labor negotiations, we have contracts with the administrators and with AFSCME. We do not have contract agreements with the largest employee groups, which are the REA teachers, and then along with REA ESP. And so that could have a material impact on our budget assumptions. And we will make an assumption, depending upon where those negotiations go or not. Inflation. I've talked to a number of people about this, but, you know, there's nothing that's going down here, and some of these inflation metrics are significant. So these are things that we're going to have to try and offset because we use all of the things that are on that list. And even the availability of materials and contractors. So as we're working with Glenn and talking about construction projects to use ESSER funds, the question is, can we get the contractors? There was one bid that we put out, I think it might have been for the wood pellets that was in the consent agenda this evening. I think we put out 4 requests for bid. We got 2 answers back, which we assume was because people either weren't interested or couldn't provide the material. And then, of course, initiatives to implement Act 173. The last page on this is simply a recap of some dates and committee meetings that you have seen before, but it doesn't hurt to keep them in mind. The only thing that I will say that's new regarding these 4 meeting dates is I have heard from some of my business manager peers in other districts and supervisory unions that a number of them are starting to consider whether they want to defer the date to approve the annual budget, just because there are so many things that are up in the air. That has a cost, of course, and it's not something that I would recommend, but when we get to December and then in January, I'll lay out before the board here, here's what we know, but here's what we don't know, and then you can take that under advisement. So that's what I had for you this evening, and I really appreciate your time and attention. If there's any other questions I can answer for you, I'm glad to do it. Yes, Dina.
One more reminder of uncertainty. The weighing study is not something that we even can look at for when was the anticipated first budgeted calendar year that we could even. It depends. And it depends on who you ask.
Nothing can happen till then.
It depends on who you ask and when you ask them. As Allison said, there's no way it's going to impact the fiscal '23 budget, okay?
Right.
And I think it's a stretch to assume that it will hit for 2024. Hopefully, if things move along, considering how important this is, you know, when the state government put Act 173 in place and those changes, they also commissioned the weighting study because they knew those changes need to be made together with 173, and if you don't, you can impose significant pain on a number of districts. So hopefully the weighting study moves along. If we're lucky, it hits in 2024. But my guess would be, and it's only my guess, that when it starts, it's probably a phased-in approach because there would be districts that might receive less weighting and districts that receive more weighting. And, you know, you'd have to allow people time to adjust. You just can't do it all in one big bang, I wouldn't think. So if we do see some impact, it's probably a partial phase-in starting in 24, 25. So we have to solve our problems for the next year or two, knowing that that may come along to help, but not immediately. Yes.
So you said nothing goes down.
I said, if anything goes down, tell me, because I haven't found it.
Well, I was just thinking about electricity and our solar arrays. I'm not sure when we see savings from that.
Neither am I. And I was just, when Glenn and I were, and I'm sorry to be flip about it, but it's like, it's very complex. And when Glenn and I were talking about this budget update, I said to Glenn, I said, you know, I've gone through some of the contracts, I haven't gone through them all. One thing I can tell you is every quarter, the district pays Johnson Controls $50,000 to $52,000 per quarter, so $200,000 a year. And the way it's supposed to work is that the savings that we get in electricity that we don't need to purchase will more than offset that $50,000 a quarter. And if they don't, there's supposed to be a true-up at the end of a year that says, oh, you paid us $200,000, but we only saved you $190. We're giving you 10 back. I haven't seen the results of that. So my guess is it will have some savings. Now, if, for example, electricity prices start to rise very quickly, which is possible, that could make solar look like a much better situation. But I don't know that it's going to save us a lot right now. I'm hoping that it's pretty much a wash, because remember, this is a 20-year thing, so it probably takes a while to phase in. But I owe you an answer to that. I need to know myself for the purposes of this budget, so in another...
For the purposes of talking about something that's going down.
Yeah.
Theoretically. We should be buying less electricity, right?
Yes. Okay. Theoretically, we're buying less.
I'm going to go home with that and...
There you go. There you go. It's always good to finish on an upbeat, so hopefully nobody will ask any more questions.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time, everybody. Always enjoy talking with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ted.
Spell something.
Okay. Lots to think about. Charlene, you are up for a Finance and Planning Committee report.
So basically,
what he said.
What he said.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
You know that, and we're on to the next. Yeah, Ted is very systematic. I'm going to speak on behalf of the Finance Committee that I feel like there's no major concerns there with the pace that we're heading. We do have meetings already planned out, so I feel like we're in a good spot, and there's no major concerns from us.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for all your work. District appreciates it. Ad hoc committee, Allison?
Sure. So yeah, we met and we have a meeting scheduled for next week discussing the mascot transition, and administration proposed some rough numbers, and we asked them to come back with a little bit more detail and also some information regarding when uniforms were purchased to kind of triage what needs to be replaced sooner than later, and discuss the breakdown of boosters funding the most of the uniform cost. And of course, with COVID, the booster funds were severely impacted last year with lack of revenue from limited or no spectators. So that, that might be a good opportunity or balance.
Okay.
And that's it.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Kevin, Policy Committee report.
Okay. Policy Committee, we reviewed and put together some revisions of Policy 1345 and 1330, which are in your packet. The changes are all in the red. Where there's a line through, that's what it said before, and the underlined is what we're proposing for the new stuff. Does anybody have any questions about that?
So the first reading,
I'd like to make a motion to accept for the first reading of the policies that we're discussing.
I'll second. Thank you. All in favor? Okay, unanimous? Or all opposed, I guess I should say too, if you want. Everybody in favor of first reading? Okay, thank you. All right, so moving on. Yeah, any questions on that? There is an opportunity to change, so talk to Kevin if you see any language issues. Old and new business. Abby and Rob Bliss on recovery updates.
Hello. I'm Abby Brodowski, Recovery Coordinator. Rob and I wanted to come and talk with you a little bit about 2 construction projects related to ESSER grant funding that have been approved through concept approval with the Agency of Education. And these are 2 that will come out of the ESSER 2 grant, which is the second grant cycle, to be completed by September 30th, 2023. The first project is our carpet removal project, and it will affect every building, including the one you're sitting in. And carpets will be replaced with low maintenance, easily sanitized luxury vinyl tile. These were on the 2020 facilities needs assessment, so these are already identified as carpets that need to be replaced. And the second project is a groundwater remediation project at Allen Street campus. So if you go to Allen Street, one corner of the building sits lower than the hillside and the driveway of the building. So water flows into the basement. They have a remarkable system set up to deal with that water, which is infiltrating the basement all the time. So we are able to use grant funding from ESSER to fix those problems, and there's a list of ways that we can do that. Both of these also, just as of yesterday, I think, passed historic preservation. So there's an additional layer that we had to go through to make sure that we could put this project out to bid. So when we have bigger construction projects that we are able to use ESSER funding for, we're going to bring them to you over time as informational. Our next step will be to put it out to bid, and then we'll bring the bid to you to approve. So we just want to make sure that you're aware of where we're moving with certain projects, and some are moving faster than others. But that's where we are with those 2, and it's exciting. They are very red tape filled. But if you have any questions, you're always welcome to call me or Rob. We just wanted to make sure you knew. Absolutely.
I'm all for the plank flooring. I think that's awesome for the children and, air quality purposes. However, do you guys have any plans for like remnant carpet, something to kind of help cut down on the echoing? And I just think that when you get to a large room, it might be a bit of a problem.
I don't really know how to, in terms of the grant proposal itself, it's definitely.
So the places where the sound comes into play the most are kind of larger classrooms or larger spaces like band rooms, things like that, cafeterias, where there's going to be some sound remediation put in kind of after the fact. The tile that goes in is, like Abby described, easy to maintain, easy to sanitize, but it's not hard as a rock like old linoleum. It's got some give to it. So it dampens some of the sound. I appreciate your question. It's something, if you were a teacher or you worked in a cafeteria or you were a musical teacher, a choral leader, orchestra, you'd want to know about that
And
stuff.
Stafford Tech as well has a place or 2 that they need, in their sound engineering areas. So we're aware, and as we get closer to working with the building principals, we're going to make sure we follow up and figure out and make sure we're meeting everyone's needs. Any other questions? Yeah, no, it is.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Thank you so much for your time. Pam and Rob on the Equity Committee update.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us to share an update on the accomplishments of our work group since we talked with you last, which I think was last June, so it's been a little bit of time. So over the summer months, we worked together for a couple of days, kind of pouring through data and information that was gathered through surveys and tools such as the Planet Youth Survey, the Vermont Youth Project, and the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. We also reviewed data that focused on special education within Rutland City Public Schools. So some of the takeaway from that reviews, I'm just going to highlight a couple. One is that there's a need to discern policy from procedure, as well as to share policies with staff, applicable policies regarding equity. That both students and staff rated teacher classroom management and behavior in relation to equity very strongly. There's a need to accommodate our written materials so that all who receive them are able to have access, and that's also true of verbal communication, such as translated materials and interpreters. And then we need to provide support for students so that everyone can complete the surveys that we give out. Over the summer, we also created a list of what we termed as low-hanging fruit. And those are actionable steps that we can take to make progress towards having a more equitable system, kind of easily and quickly. Examples include revising the registration form, creating a list of holidays that recognize all cultures for district-wide use, posting applicable policies on the website, using closed captioned when showing videos in classes. Members of the work group also had the option of participating in a shared learning experience. We had the option of reading the book Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity, and then there was opportunities for us to get together and talk about the content that went well into the fall. So thus far, this school year, I'm going to pass out an accompaniment to what you received in your packet. Just get rid of there. In your packet, you received a landscaped form that said, that's titled the Equity and Inclusion Planning. So what that landscape form is kind of an outline of where we're headed for the next few years to help us get to our goal. Way back in the beginning, last year, the plan actually starts with our inaugural year, which was last year, where we laid the groundwork for what we see in the future for our students and their families. And so the plan starts with last year, which again was already done, and then it moves into what we're going to do in the future. You'll notice on that landscape form that there's an underlined title with each year. If you had that on Google, you'd click on it and it would lead you to this page. So when year one would lead you to this page, which you have now. And then if you clicked on year two, it would lead you to that page, and so on. And so what these are a list of actionable steps for us to take in areas of focus for each year, and we're just in the process of building this plan. So last month at our meeting, I proposed it, sent it out, and it's taken from all the different things that we've been doing over the last 16 months. Different things that we talked about wanting to do, different things that needs that we've identified within our buildings and within the way we function. At our next meeting in November, we will look through each year and adjust where necessary. And then the same review process, just so you know, is happening with administrators. When it's in a much better polished form and folks have had a chance to look at it, we will vet it through groups of students within the district so that they can give us feedback and suggestions. That's a brief description of our overview over the last few months. We welcome any comments or questions.
Any questions from the board?
As you look over these pages and see where some of our areas of focus will be, please feel free to give me a call if you have any input or concerns, questions, something you think needs changed or added.
I really appreciate the work. This is nice. Thank you. Very good.
Thanks.
All right, so no questions for Pam?
Pam, I have a question.
I knew if I sat here long enough.
Good wait time. Good wait time.
So I was watching PBS the other night, and of course there was discussion about books that students of color could relate to, and I notice in year one, classroom libraries expanded. Can you talk a little bit about? I mean, I assume that's what I was seeing the other night on TV, and
correct. You want to talk a little bit about the
Sure.
clip? Okay.
So what we heard from our schools, and particularly in the early reading years, so like K to 3 especially, that we had a limited selection of texts that reflected a kind of more inclusive environment. So we put together a team who researched with our librarian, Laura Mott Cornwell, who oversees K to 8, researched what would be texts or titles that we could use that would show a more inclusive environment, so that students could look into those texts and see themselves, see other cultures, understand other cultures, understand their own culture, understand, just that there's a lot more to see in the world of text and books than one might initially think about. And last year, we were able to fund a small purchase where we developed classroom libraries across K-6 for books that are kind of read aloud or there for kids to read on their level. It was really successful. Good team, worked hard on it. The librarian helped a great deal. We made our purchase. Of course, we had to do our procurement and make our purchase in an acceptable way, and the purchase went through local bookstore in the end. It was pretty helpful. The supply chain slowed it down a little bit, but we did get the titles we wanted in the end.
Good, great, thank you.
Yep.
Is it possible to get a copy of year one?
Sure. So year one is in a very different form. So what we did with year one was at the end of last school year, and then again in the summer, we kind of did like, what are all the different things we did this year? And I did it in a Jamboard, and I don't know if you've seen that before, but it's like you take Post-its, put it in, okay. So I went to print that off, and I can't get it to print just the Jamboard, so I've got to retype it, but yes, I will send that out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you for all the good work and the team effort. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
And statement of inclusion discussion. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure. I was going to thank Hurley for asking me to research this topic. I was going to ask him to let the board know what his goal was with it and why he wanted me to prepare it, but he's not here. Do you know, Bill? Have any idea?
I think he's...
Otherwise, I can speak to what the research that I did.
Yeah, I think that it's a statement that's been made by cities and towns around the state and including our own city. And I think Curly was interested in having us discuss it and maybe consider it as well.
So I spoke with a couple of people and put together a couple of examples, 4 examples here. One is the Rutland City Board of Aldermen Declaration of Inclusion, which is almost identical to the town of Pittsford. There was a statement submitted by a local resident, a sample statement from a K through 12 district in the Midwest, something random, and Rutland Town Select Board statement. I know you didn't have a lot of time to review these. There are certain classes protected by the DOJ, by Civil Rights Division, and those are pretty much included in each of these to some degree or another. Bill, you handed out, I'm not sure what that was that you handed out.
This is it's the same copy that you have, that the Rutland City Board of Aldermen.
It's just a blank version.
Yeah. And it's, you can see,
I guess,
I was just gonna say, you can see the names in the back of the folks who are bringing this around the state.
Yeah.
So I think Hurley's just looking for us to consider it, and if we want to put it on the agenda for discussion, we can do that.
yeah, I think that's a good idea. I was glad that he brought that up, and I just had a couple of thoughts about the different types of statements that I found. Some of them are more, I don't know the word to use, encouraging or uplifting than others. I'd like to be clear in our commitment as a board, as a district, of that we want to be welcoming. I would also like to be uplifting and positive in our statement. I don't know if anyone, if we could discuss these at another, soon, another point in time, and just, your kind of impressions on what kind of message that we want to send. I think the message with a declaration of inclusion is clear, at least to me it is. We all have different perceptions, as we have been discussing, but I think it's a real good idea to keep it on the agenda, keep talking about it, figure out what, and we can align this with our equity policy. We can align it with our vision, our mission. It doesn't have to be long, but how we want to say it.
at the district.
I like that, Anne. I guess if any board members have any ideas for this, and I like the uplifting message, and it really does speak to how we want to be perceived, right? And how we want the community to feel, guests, community who live here, et cetera. So any ideas on that, just send it maybe to Anne or Bill, and, you know, keep the communication going. And I think we can come back and have a larger discussion and maybe work it into our next meeting.
Sure, yep.
With Susan, yeah. Because a lot of this discussion goes back to what we discussed, so we can circle back and come to, you know, an agreement. Any questions for Anne, comments on this?
I'm wondering if we could just keep it to bringing the materials to the next board meeting versus
Sure.
sending it through email, because I don't want to miss
Yeah,
it.
that's why I was one directed, just to sort of
That'd be
get
great.
ideas, but Bill
Yeah.
would have been, but that's fine, or at the next meeting when we do discuss it larger. Okay, so no other comments or questions for Anne on this? Thank you for your work, it's nice to see another example. And again, this was one that sort of a different like copy. Okay, so I guess that's it on the agenda for that. We are going to go into executive session. Dina?
This is why it was placed in front of me.
Yeah,
So,
I can't do it.
motion, I found a random motion. I make a motion for the board to convene to executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations, the premature release of information regarding those subjects, which would place the board at a substantial disadvantage. We're inviting Bill Olson, Ted Plemenos, and Rob Bliss.
I have a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you.